Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. So, a little story here for you. I'd say about a month ago, my husband came home and told me that about this guy that he works with. My husband works up at a mine, and he said this guy's a heavy duty mechanic, works 12-hour shifts. A lot of people would look at it and be like, no, that's not the most ideal life. Heavy duty mechanic is extremely hard on the physique. My husband says it's the hardest job at this mine. And he says, this guy, Jim, he said, every time I go to this guy and I'll say, oh, hey, and this guy's in his 40s. Hey, Jim, how's it going? He said, without a doubt, the guy every time says, oh, so good. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. Isn't that cool? And I'm like, that is so cool. And for some reason, that has totally stuck with me. And I keep thinking, imagine if the world was full of more people like Jim, where if somebody, and I always think about it in my head, like next time somebody asks me how I'm doing, I'm just going to be like, oh, so good. Because we just don't hear that. Usually we start, oh, how was your day? And we start complaining about, oh, I did this and I worked too much and my neck's sore and this and I'm tired. I didn't sleep well last night. We tend to go down the negative pathway, or at least tell people about what's wrong in our lives rather than, hey, look at all the great things that happened today. And I thought, what a different life it would be, a different world it would be if we could focus on the positive, if we could become happier people. And I just feel like there's more unhappy people than there is happy. So my guest today, lucky for you guys, is a positive psychology expert, Robert Mack. Robert is an Ivy League educated positive psychology expert, celebrity happiness coach, executive coach, and author. In addition to completing his MBA coursework, Robert attained a master's in applied positive psychology, the science of happiness and success, from the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League institution. The MAP degree is a degree held by only a few dozen people in the world. Robert is one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between happiness and success. He helps individuals and organizations achieve an energizing balance and authentic personal happiness and effortless professional success based on time-tested, face-valid, empirical data and timeless transcendental wisdom. Robert's work has been endorsed by Oprah, Vanessa Williams, and many others. He has been a regular featured guest expert on Good Morning America, The Today Show, Access Hollywood, E! Network's Own, and KTLA, and in magazines like GQ, Self, Health, Cosmopolitan, and Glamour. Robert's first book, Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment, is a celebrity endorsed and critically acclaimed book. You can find Rob at coachrobmack.com. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
You got a good resume.
It's funny because when I hear it read to me, I'm like, who's that guy? It's not that bad, I guess. But it takes me a lot to sort of identify with those experiences. I guess they've all happened, but you sort of, I don't know, you forget about these things.
Yeah, but you're popular, which tells something about what you're talking about. People want to hear it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, and this is pre-pandemic. We've never had as many unhappy people as we do today.
Right.
Right.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's even more so the case here, 2021. But yes, that also means there's never been a greater opportunity for more happiness in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a sad story. Like I've heard you talk about it before on other shows, and I would love for you to share, what basically started to happen to you. I think it sounded like it started to happen to you when you hit your teens, like when the hormones started to come on board and things started to go downhill. So I'd love for you to share your story.
Yeah. So I am the unlikeliest person probably in the world to be a happiness coach because I feel like I was born the unhappiest, the most miserable person in the world. I mean, honestly, I remember being deeply unhappy and anxious and stressed out and self-loathing at like age 6 or 7.
Oh
My
wow.
first memories.
Was your mom depressed?
No, I mean, as far
No.
as I know,
Okay.
she didn't have an easy life by far, and neither did my father. But yeah, I mean, we had lots of stress in the household. I think,
Mm-hmm.
like any household, and financial challenges and all those things. But No, I feel like I was partly wired
Okay.
to be a little low happiness wise, and we know that's a thing that we have a genetic predisposition for happiness, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody's wired a little differently. So I remember being unhappy at 6 or 7. As I got older, I thought I would just grow out of it, and I thought for sure if I could do well athletically and academically, which I tended to do, I would eventually, have some friends, maybe have a girlfriend, and everything would go away. But that wasn't the case. It just got worse and worse until it got so bad that I was thinking about suicide and killing myself dozens and dozens of times a day. I thought about it more than anything else in the world, and I wanted it more than anything else in the world.
Wow.
And so I eventually decided to do some research, and I looked up the ways, means, and methods to kill myself. I eventually decided I would slit my wrist. So I got a steak knife from the kitchen, dug it into my wrist, and I still have the suicide marks. Probably can't see them there on the screen, but to this day. And what happened though was very odd and unexpected. Like as I dug this knife in to my wrist, and I was suicidal, but I still didn't want to experience the pain, right? That's the point
Yeah.
of
I was going to
of
say,
wanting to
why
kill
did you,
yourself.
of all the things you could have chosen, but yes. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to be violent about. I mean, it's violent still, but I didn't want to be
Mhm.
super violent about it. I didn't have access to a lot of the other ways. I didn't have a bridge close by. I didn't have a gun, any of these things. So I didn't have access to prescription medication. So I
Mhm.
chose the knife, stuck it into my wrist, and for no good reason at the time, with nothing in my external life or circumstances changing, I felt this inexplicable peace and limitless love and indescribable joy just wash over me. I felt a sense of like well-being that I hadn't felt maybe ever in my life. And so in that moment, I thought, this is so strange. Like, this is not what I was expecting. So I decided to postpone suicide, at that time, and now it's laughable, but it was just an hour. I was like, I'm going to postpone suicide for an hour. It's like, who says an hour, but I mean,
Set the
I
clock, set the timer. It's going to be an
yeah,
hour.
yeah, it was really weird. And I wasn't even committed to the full hour, honestly, but I said, I'll start doing a little research and just see maybe what happened to me just now. And so I started doing some research, and then very quickly that hour bled into several hours, bled into several days. And it's been over 2 decades now.
I was going to say,
And
how old were you then when you did
yeah, I
that?
was in my early 20s,
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I had an incredible consulting job and had a great girlfriend and had a really good life, 2 nice German cars, the whole thing, but I was miserable. Really miserable.
Wow. Do you think are you religious? Do you think that was a God intervention?
Boy, Karen, great question. I feel like you do this for a living. Yes, actually. I mean, it was both, and I say this with the utmost respect, but it was both religion that led me to or contributed to the suicidal ideation and experience, but it was also religion that prevented me from following through completely. And so by that I meant I had a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. I felt a lot of self-judgment as a result of sort of this religious conditioning and programming. But
Huh.
also I was so concerned about what would happen to me after I killed myself that it prevented me from fully executing. I think I was like, I read Buddhist texts and Taoist texts, and I read the Quran and the Bible, and none of them had a particularly glowing review of what happens to you if you kill yourself.
No. No. Yeah.
So
Not good.
No. So yeah, it was a catch-22 there.
Do you think though that it was a spirit that brought that good energy that stopped you from doing it?
So yeah, so now I'm convinced. I call it divine intervention.
Yes.
And right, without question. And what happened now, and this has taken me 20 years to realize, right, is that my mind went quiet and I was still and silent
Mm-hmm.
in a deep, authentic way for just a moment. And in that moment of silence, I was perfectly present, and I forgot about the world to some extent, forgot about myself to some extent. And without anything on my mind, I was just drowning in my own divinity. I was just drowning in the happiness that we all ultimately are.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a taste of that. But it was this silence and the stillness of mind that allowed me to finally recognize what was always there all along.
Mm-hmm. There's just proof, I think, that of like the higher, the higher power, whatever people choose to believe, but there is a higher power. I interviewed Byron Katie last year, and her story's very similar. Like she was on the, in an attic on the floor, ready to die. And same thing, she just had something kind of wash over her, and literally in an instant completely changed who she was, and like came out as that, like she was this super negative person that was miserable, her children hated her, and she came out this like glowing, loving person that, and they were like, who are you? But it was a divine intervention. And I've had them myself in different means where it's like something just comes to me, and I know that it wasn't something I created in my brain or, make believe. It's, okay, thank you, whoever that was that just dropped that into my head or into my life. And I feel like it's divine intervention for sure.
I love that. I'm jealous of you. I'd be jealous of you, especially if I didn't like you so much. I mean, I love Byron Katie. She's one of my favorite spiritual teachers. I've read all of her books multiple times, and very familiar with that story. It's reminiscent of Jill Bolt's story too, the author of Stroke of Insight.
Oh yeah, hers is fascinating. I love that too. I love it. Yep. Did you try, so before this happened, did you try going on antidepressants? Did you think, okay, I must have this chemical imbalance that I need drugs for?
So I didn't. I very much wanted to, and I was convinced, as much as anyone could be convinced, that it was a biochemical issue, And so I was concerned for a number of reasons. I had a good consulting job, and I felt that might compromise. I was afraid that might not go over well if they found out. I was also sort of embarrassed by it. I'd also done some research into antidepressants, and I'd read a very interesting book called The Emperor's New Drugs. And, it was essentially an exploration and an effort to challenge whether or not these double-blind studies were actually double-blind, or if people were breaking the blind. Right. And so whether or not they were as valid as they say they were and whatnot. So I was suspicious of antidepressants, and I was pretty much suspicious of everything. I mean, quite frankly. But no, I didn't go down that path. And I can certainly understand why people do. It can be very, very helpful and supportive. At the same time, for me, and only for me, I'm really happy that I didn't, because it allowed me to take a different path that I feel, it's worked out.
And I wonder just how many people, and maybe you can share kind of what your experience has been, is how many people in the world have considered suicide at some point in their life. I think it's probably much more common than we believe it to be, because it's not something that people share. I know for myself, when I was a teenager, I tried as well. Very, very bad attempt at it. I think I used like a leg razor, because you see people in the movies that take the razor out of that little piece, the metal piece out of it, the razor out of the thing, and then cut. So I just had like a lady's, razor, and I tried to cut my wrist with it. It was just a horrible attempt. But it was teens. It was, and same as you. I just wanted to die. I just thought, what is the point of any of this? I was miserable. I'm sure it was over some guy that I'd broken up with, like really silly things. But at the time I was down, and it was like, I wanted nothing to do with this life. And the only thing, interesting enough, what stopped me from actually doing it was I was set on the fact that I wanted to have children. And that was the thing that saved me. I was like, I can't kill myself because I need to have kids one day. Isn't that strange?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's profound, actually. Purpose. There's purpose in that, right? My mom shared something similar with me. She was very depressed. She'd lost her father very young, and she lost her mother not long after that. And but she happened to have 3 kids, one of which was me. And she said, your father said to me, I know that you're so sad and depressed about this loss, and I know that you might be challenged with even wanting to continue living, but you got these 3 kids. And she said she thought about it, and she was like, you're absolutely right about that. And it kept her alive. And so I was found that impressive. What you're sharing, so deeply inspiring and so life affirming.
Yeah, absolutely. And men in general, there's a much higher suicide rate than women. And I think that's because you guys do feel like, well, it's not manly to take an antidepressant. It's not, you guys don't have the same, I think, help maybe that women do. I'm not sure, but.
Yeah. And generally men also tend to explore and then leverage much more violent means with respect to suicide, right? So they'll take the gun, they'll shoot themselves, whereas women will tend to, use prescription drugs, something that they can sometimes recover from. So it's interesting. You're right about that. Men and women tend to be pretty similar in their levels of happiness, although women tend to experience a lot more rumination, and they tend to, I think, experience more depression. But you're right, men do commit a lot more suicide, or at least are successful, quote unquote, with suicide. The other part of that too, which I found was interesting, is that most people actually, after they've made one attempt, don't make a second attempt, which is interesting.
Wow. Very.
Right? Yeah, there's something about that. There's something, there's something life affirming about that, and clarifying about having that first experience that allows people to maybe recalibrate, reprioritize, and hopefully move in increasingly healthy directions.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I asked about your mom being possibly depressed is there's a lot of evidence, scientific evidence coming out now about trauma being passed on from the mother into the womb of the unborn child, and how that child can come out carrying trauma from her, and she could be carrying it from her mom. Like, it can be a generational trauma, which I think is just like,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, and it's interesting too, because I know that when I hear that, I think, first of all, my mind is blown by it, and it makes complete sense. And it can feel like an incredible challenge and obstacle, but it's also it's a gift. It's an incredible gift. I don't think anything has given me the clarity, the insight, the purpose, and the passion that my unhappiness, depression, and suicidal ideation has. It's unbelievable. It's allowed me to experience a depth of happiness that I rarely see in the world, because for me, it was life and death.
So how did you go then from that to being in that place? Oh, pretty much your whole life, which means your brain was very much so wired for depression. How do you pull yourself out of that and then go on to become a psychologist in positive?
Positive real slowly. Yeah, right.
I'm sure.
I took the long scenic route, and that's why I do the work now. So hopefully people don't have to take the long scenic route. Right. I read and listened to everything I could possibly get my hands on, especially a voracious reader. So I read everything, and I was smart enough to know that I wasn't smart at all. That if all of my knowledge and intelligence had got me to a place where I was so deeply depressed and suicidal, maybe I should start fresh and not necessarily throw all of that information and knowledge out, but I should probably look in new directions. So I would read and listen to everyone on the planet. I started with like Abraham Hicks, and of course, Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle and Rupert Spira and Ramana Maharshi. I mean, everyone, poets, philosophers, nobody was off limits as far as I was concerned. Everybody had something to teach me. And then when I would meet happy people out in the world, I'd ask them questions. I know that they thought I was crazy, and I was, but I'd say, how are you so happy? Why? How did you do this? Why are you built this way? And how did you get there? And I found that lots of very happy people were unaware, like, some of them were just wired that way.
Yes.
And unfortunately, lots of people that are just wired that way, they don't really have to work at it. When something bad happens, they can be thrown off kilter or off balance so hard that they never recover in the way that they could otherwise. So anyway, I just read everything I possibly could, applied it all, and then tracked what worked, and then forgot about what didn't.
Wow. Who stood out to you, do you think, the most out of all the stuff that you researched? I got all those books too. I was probably reading them at the same time you were, because we're the same age, but same thing. I kind of dove in my 20s, like mostly my 20s, just all of those people, the Wayne Dyers of the world, Byron Katie. I mean, remember that the first book was the, not the Law of Attraction one, Celestial.
Celestine Prophecy.
Yes, thank you.
That one, yes.
That was my first one. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. What is this? And then dove in. Like, I'm a researcher too. So who do you feel like, when you look back, is there somebody that connected with you more than the other ones?
So I was an Abraham Hicks fanatic.
Were
okay.
You?
Oh my gosh, you kidding me? I mean, poor Esther and Jerry Hicks and God bless his soul. Like I had signed up to the CD program, okay,
Yes.
and I didn't have money for the CD program, but I signed up for it and was like, I didn't read what it is. They'll just every book I'd read and reread. I probably to this day back at my mom and dad's house in Pittsburgh, I probably have at least 6 or 7 copies of each of the books they've ever put out, including the ones they self-published in the very beginning, like
Wow.
A New Beginning and A New Beginning 2, and Sarah and the Foreverness of Friends, and all these books that lots of Abraham Hicks, particularly new fans, don't know about. But Abraham Hicks stood out to me. And the reason was,
Wasn't he, sorry, Rob, wasn't he the one too that, weren't they, him and Esther, like they were talking to a higher being?
yes.
Yes.
So
Okay.
this is a big challenge for me coming from a fire and brimstone Christian upbringing,
Yes.
but I had this knee-jerk reaction against sort of, traditional kind of fundamental kind of Christianity. And I wasn't reaping the fruit of that experience. It was bad fruit for me. So I had a knee-jerk reaction. I leaned really hard into science because I always had kind of an analytical mind and I trusted science. So as I read more and more science, I thought, okay, there is something here about being able to improve your happiness level, clearly. But what I loved about Abraham Hicks was they put it in language that felt more inspiring, didn't feel so dry and sterile, and also they helped me bridge this gap between like this deep spiritual bent that I had inside, but my inability to kind of understand why religion showed up in the way that it did in my world, in my life. And so they were just really pivotal for me in my journey.
Oh, I bet. And just obviously you connected with what they were talking about, even though you came from this background of having no idea. I mean, they talk about having guides. So for those of you that don't know who they are, they would claim to get messages from the other side. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
But it was spiritual teachings that were very profound. So when you listen to it, you think, oh, even if it's not true, this is great information.
You just nailed it. And that's what I love. I can still remember reading the introduction to one of the first books. And Jerry, Esther's wife, said something like, a lot of you will feel funny about where these messages come from, but I've always believed in judging a tree by its fruit. So don't worry about where it comes from. If it's something that you can use and apply in your life, use it and apply it and just move on from there. And I did. I took that very seriously. I said, you know what? I'm going to take it. If it's a tool that can be used, I'll use it. And then it just happened to be very helpful.
Yeah. And so then you went on to go to university.
Yeah. So then I found this program. I was doing an MBA. So working in a consulting company, loved the people, hated the job.
Yeah.
Living in Philadelphia, very cold, was very miserable. I decided to move to Miami, start this MBA program. And then I found this other program at the University of Pennsylvania, which was an applied master's degree in positive psychology, which is the science and study of what makes life worth living.
Wow.
And it's the science of happiness. Oh, yes. I'm sure you've already read all the books that are in the part of the curriculum anyway. So you can probably teach it at this point, honestly, Karen. But yeah, I entered in this program. Is super expensive, but I had such an intrinsic interest in the material itself that I was like, even if I can't use the degree, I don't care. I just want to be happy,
That's so cool.
Yeah, took the program and been happy.
So what's the difference between just regular psychology and applied positive psychology?
Yeah, so business as usual psychology or traditional psychology focuses intently on what's wrong with people. Mm-hmm. It focuses on mental illness and the curing of mental illness. Applied positive psychology focuses on what's right with people, on their signature strengths, their values, their character traits, and how you can actually double down on your strengths and make life even better. So Martin Seligman, who was the godfather, really, the grandfather of positive psychology, started his career really studying like learned helplessness and depression and all that stuff. And he always assumed or thought that if you could just remove what's wrong with people, you'll get a happy, healthy, thriving individual. But he found that over the decades, that wasn't the case, that you can actually remove the dysfunction, but you won't get a happy person. You'll get a flatlining individual. And so he said, we've got to add something here, something that focuses on, going from zero to something that's positive in terms of a number, right? And so that's how the science of positive psychology developed.
That's really cool. I actually looked up that guy's video today, his TED Talk. I watched his TED Talk just to get a better understanding of it before we talked today. So yeah, really interesting, man. And so cool that he came up with that he could see that.
It's
crazy.
It is. It's incredible, and it speaks to what a brilliant man, and
Yep.
also a guy that's willing to change his mind, which is so critical and so important to say, you know what I've been doing has been very helpful and useful, and there's maybe something I've been missing here. So let's look at that.
Is there science to back it up? Because I think a lot of people would hear like, oh, you're a positive psychology coach. They would kind of think that that's a bit woo woo or a bit, law of attraction and whatever. But it sounds like it's very much so based in science. Like this guy came up with a way to change people's brain around a little bit.
That's right. So the program that I went to is an Ivy League program at University of Pennsylvania, and it's the only graduate program in applied positive psychology that I'm aware of. And positive psychology has grown out of mostly the Ivies, Harvard, but also places like Claremont and University of Michigan and Stanford. And so what they've done is they've taken tens of thousands of studies over about 20-year period. And they've asked people either directly, they have other kinds of assessments and reports. Most of them are subjective reports. So you have to ask people how they feel. It's sometimes hard. You can sometimes use MRI scans and PET scans and things like that to look at people's brains to see what's actually going on. But yeah, these are time-tested, face valid, empirical studies that have been done in ways that control for all the other extraneous variables that can get in the way of actually drawing a statistically significant conclusion. So yeah, there's very
A lot of
robust
science.
science.
Yeah. Do you think, Rob, that we as human beings are hardwired for more so unhappiness?
Such a profound question, Karen. I've thought about it a lot in my life.
Me too.
So the human brain is wired first for survival.
Yes.
Right? It's to keep you alive. If you're not alive, very difficult to be happy, right? So I would say that to that extent, yes, actually, right? The first requirement of being happy is being alive. And so now that being said, there are both sort of happiness producing supportive kind of biases, heuristics built into the brain, but also there are some things that are also negativity type of biases built into the brain, right? So you've got something like the negativity bias. Maybe people have heard of it, but it generally takes about 5 positive experiences for every 1 negative experience to compensate for that 1 negative experience. So that's why
Oh,
you get sometimes you get 500 likes or positive comments on an Instagram post, but you get that 1 negative comment and you can't help but focus on it to the exclusion of
so
the other
true.
500 positive
Yeah.
comments. So, right, we found this over and over again. And so there's this negativity bias that's built into the brain that can make it very difficult, for us to experience that kind of lasting, abiding, and meaningful happiness that we're ultimately after.
Mm.
Yeah, there are dozens of biases built into the brain.
Yeah. I think I remember somebody talking about it as far as the survival thing goes. Everything goes back to being hardwired for survival. And it's like if we walked around the world as hunter-gatherers going, oh, life is so good. Oh, the tiger. Oh, no big deal. The famine. We don't need to get food. That's okay. Like we wouldn't have survived if we weren't always looking for the problems.
Well, that's just it, right? And that's precisely the way the brain and the mind works, is that it works like the center of a ship. It goes out looking into the world for problems to solve in order to validate its position, right? And so the beautiful thing is caveman, cavewoman days, that's something that's very valuable. It's still valuable to this day, still adaptive in lots of ways, but also very maladaptive in other ways, because we no longer live in this caveman, cave woman era.
Mhm.
And so most of the challenges, the stressors of today aren't life and death, right? It's like, paying the rent can be very scary. It can make you feel very stressed out. But do you really have to think about it for 30 days in a row every single month before you actually pay the bill or whatever? Is it that life and death? Well, no. And if you look out into nature and you see all other living creatures, they don't live that way, right? If there's a problem, they solve for it as quickly as they can. And then as soon as they solve for it or they do the best they can, they forget about it, right? And so it's odd and interesting, actually, that only human beings of all living creatures have made a problem of their own existence in ways that lead to mood disorders or personality disorders or depression or unhappiness, right? And so all of
Mhm.
nature is blissful except for, men and women. And that's an interesting,
It is.
insight.
And I've heard you talk about how depression, since I think you said the 1950s, has just been crazy on the rise. And I'll have to say that it's the number one complaint, I guess you could say, from women that I work with is always depression and anxiety, and just that level of unhappiness with their life. And it seems to get worse as they start to transition through their hormonal years of when they're in their 40s, kind of transitioning into menopause. I see it a lot more. And I know there's a hormonal piece to it, but I think there's a real spiritual shift to that time as well. It's the time where women finally get to think about themselves. Their priorities are shifting from caretaking little children and being pregnant, or caretaking a home, or trying to find the husband, trying to get established in her career. And so it's this weird time where, and I think that when women can't put their finger on why it is they're feeling that way, that it actually leads to depression, because they just don't know how to bring happiness into their life. And so it is very much so prevalent in today's society. Why do you think that it's grown so much since the 1950s?
Boy, such a great point. And just to add context to precisely to what you said, in the early 2000s, we had 10 times the level of unipolar and bipolar depression that we did in 1950, right? The average age for the first bout of depression was 29 and a half years of age in 1950. And in the early 2000s, it was about 13 years of age. So that meant you had 13-year-olds for the first time in a long time, not only thinking about killing themselves, but actually killing themselves, right? And we had more Axis 1 and Axis 2 disorders. And so, yeah, things were sort of getting worse and worse. There's so many reasons for that. Mm-hmm. I would say that the greatest reason that I could possibly see, and the ultimate root cause, I think, of all the depression, certainly that I've experienced, unhappiness, is a mind that simply can't sit still and be quiet. That's it. The mind plays this game of whack-a-mole all day, every day. And when you're inundated with information and you have access to that information through these really great, cool technological, instruments, and you can see what everybody else is doing in the world. And so you've already got a challenge with comparison, competitiveness, and now you've got this incredible social media platform to, magnify all of that, and to let you see people that don't only live a couple doors down, but live countries and countries away, and then on top of that, everything and everybody is vying for your attention. We call it availability entrepreneurs, but essentially we all kind of work in that space a little bit if we're marketing and advertising. So we're inundated with information and with not only our own thoughts, but everybody else's thoughts as well, right? And so when you've got that kind of cognitive overload, and you're not at the same time taught how to emotionally regulate, how to self-soothe, how to find peace in the midst of chaos and confusion. And when everything else that's external becomes a more important priority than everything that's internal, you just continue to lose not only focus and perspective, but you also find all of these skills and mindsets eroding that generally kept us connected with each other, connected with ourselves, and connected with the world, right? And so I would say it's a number of things all contributing or sort of playing to some of the biases and some of the leanings that the brain already has built in. But interestingly enough, you don't have to solve for all of that in order to solve for unhappiness itself, right? There are cheat codes, right? There are master hacks, there are master keys to experiencing the kind of happiness that you're ultimately after.
Yeah. So, not everybody gets the divine intervention. And I know, like, as far as how the brain works, if somebody has always gone down or tends to go down more of the negative pathways in their brain, where they associate and they're always kind of looking for the negative in their life, the bad things that are happening, always, focusing on, oh, well, I don't have enough money. I don't have the body I want. I don't have XYZ. There's so many things that we all think about. How do we go from that when we're so trained to go down those pathways in our brain? How do we pull out of this? If I came to you and I'm like, okay, Rob, I'm not happy. Fix me.
Yeah, sure. So, the first thing I'd say, if somebody else is asking us, we want to teach through our living, shining example. That's number one. I've seen both the value and the limitations of trying to tell people what they should do or how to do it. There's nothing worse than unsolicited advice. It's the only thing that's really given and never taken.
Right.
Advice,
Yes.
right? Now, that being said, if we are that person who cares about happiness and cares about the happiness of those whom we love, there are really four paths, okay, that I would argue. And I'm big on trying to simplify things as much as possible because I waded through so much information for so long and I was so lost in the confusion that can introduce into your life that I'm really intent on like really simplifying it. So it's really four main things. Happy activities, right? So that means creating a list of happiness items, things that you love, feel inspired by, that help you to feel alive with very little time, energy, effort. Make a list, right? And do everything you can to spend more time doing those things, okay? The alternative, the sort of flip side of that is happiness valleys. Those are things that you don't enjoy. No matter how hard you try to enjoy them, you just don't enjoy them. So you want to do everything you can to outsource, delegate, reduce, eliminate, automate, or regulate all your valleys. Get them off your plate if you can, okay? So that's the low-hanging fruit. Then it's about happy people. And if not happy people, at least people that are aspire to be happy. It's incredible how contagious emotion is. Emotion is more contagious than anything else on the entire planet, including the coronavirus, all that stuff. It's more contagious than anything. You can pass it through a Zoom call. You can pass it through the phone, through technology, with a glance, with a look across a room. You can pass emotion. So happy people, it's incredibly important, right? The third piece of it is really just happy thoughts. And that's really what you're getting at. That's about telling a better feeling story based in truth. And it has to be based in truth or it won't be believable. Telling a better feeling story based in truth about everything and everybody in your life, starting with yourself. That's just so critical. I remember when I was really going through it, and I remember looking at my bank account and there was less than $0. There was a negative sign and money that I owed the bank for, over for withdrawal fees. And so we're being over withdrawn. So I remember thinking, I'm broke. And then the very next moment, I thought, I committed to being a happy person, even if I'm broke. What is the truthful way of reframing this so that I can feel better in the moment? I said, well, there's only up from here. And I'm rich in ways that money can never, be a substitute for. And then I could, and there are things that I currently am or have that I would never sell for all the money in the world. My health, my loved ones, my creativity, my ability to pivot, right? So that's the third path. And the fourth path, the way I'd put it is, it's also happy, no thoughts. So the real master key and the ultimate cheat code is being able to see through the sort of tricks that the mind plays all the time, not intentionally, and get to a place where you can simply enjoy just being, even in the midst of a conversation, even when you're just swiffering, where you're not always lost in discursive thinking, obsessive compulsive thoughts, not always living in the past, not always living in the future or projecting the future, where you're really just tapped in, tuned in, turned on to not only the present moment, but presence itself, your own awareness, right? And in that awareness is perfect happiness. It is perfect happiness. So the ultimate cheat code is that. I try to save that for the end because people always think that's impossible. And I understand because I felt that way too. But yeah.
This is so different too than doing affirmations. We talk about the books that we used to read back in our 20s, and a lot of it was, Louise Hay. And when you've got this problem in your life, you just have to say this affirmation over and over and over. I'm beautiful. I'm happy. And this is what you're talking about is totally different. And I really appreciate that because over the years, I've really come away from that and away from law of attraction, the sitting back and just imagining that things are going to happen and thinking that's going to just come fall on your lap because you've got that great energy going out. I think what you're talking about is much more powerful and realistic, where you're reframing. Like when you said that, the reframing of situations. So you could have, when you had no money, you could have just gone into the deep dark hole and thought your life was terrible and nothing's good going to come out of this. And I've been in those places and I've gone so good at the reframe, which is, okay, well, this is life, like maybe my car broke down or something, or something went in the house that cost us a ton of money. And it's like, you immediately just think, oh, my bad luck. This is so terrible. And my life sucks. And why does this happen to me? And instead, now I can be like, this is life. This happens to everybody. And if we didn't have this hard times, we wouldn't be able to grow from it and learn from it and become happier people. And it's just this like instant reframe in the brain that I think is so powerful.
Oh, so eloquently expressed, so powerfully said. I agree with you. And it helps to have some life experience behind you
Yeah.
because once you have enough life experience, you can first of all see through the empty promises that conditioned circumstances and other people make. Practically everything in your life and everybody in your life, in some way or the other, says and promises you, I'll make you happy. No, I'll make you happy. No, I'll make you, it's kind of the temptation that we all fall victim to. And then if you've experienced any of those things, and we all have, you realize how quickly most of it fades. Even the nicest car, even the most beautiful man or woman, even the most incredible relationship, it fades, right? The effect that, and we call that the hedonic treadmill. We adapt hedonically, right? And so
Yes, right.
when you derive happiness from things, people, places, or activities, it never gives you as much of it, and it doesn't last as long as you ever think it will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one piece. The other piece is this, which I think goes deeper than that, which is that some of the things that I have prayed for have ultimately happened, or the things that I have set intentions for or visualized, they've happened. And I think if you persist long enough, you can make practically almost anything happen, happen. And you often regret it. So, I mean, I've prayed for things to happen and like, I'll do anything. And then it happens and you meet the perfect person and you get the perfect job and you're just making all that money. And then boom, you recognize all of a sudden, the tiger, the lion that was hiding inside of this desire that you had. And the best thing turns out to be the worst thing. But also the worst thing sometimes turns out to be the best thing.
Yeah.
And so you let go of this idea that you know what's best for you. And you certainly let go of this idea that you know what's best for anyone else. And you begin to appreciate moments as they are. And in that, something miraculous and magical does happen, which is things do begin to shift and change because your experience of yourself, of other people in the world, shifts and change. As you relax and rest on the inside, you become a little more peaceful. Suddenly, you're easier to get along with. Other people are easier to get along with. You have more energy. You sleep better. Things go better. You're more creative, efficient, effective as a thinker. And all of a sudden, life begins to seemingly collaborate and cooperate with you when it's really just you finally collaborating with life.
Exactly. Oh, very well said. I love that. That's exactly what happens. Exactly. It's kind of law of attraction, but it's not. It's that you're seeing things in a different lens, and therefore different things start to happen and you start to bring forth different things because you've yourself have shifted.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way I always put it is, so once when I was putting myself through business school, I was doing entertainment stuff. And I remember working a celebrity gifting suite. And it was the first real experience that I had where really rich, famous people who seem to have it all were getting really expensive gifts for free. And I remember thinking, this is interesting. I need this watch so much more than they do or whatever. And I thought, isn't that interesting that we get what we don't ultimately need, or once you finally aren't desperate for it, don't feel needy around it, sort of just comes flooding in. And there's some kind of law in the world, in the universe, like that the second you become deeply, truly happy on the inside, everything that happens can enhance that happiness, but nothing can give it to you, nothing can take it away. And so there's just something incredibly attractive, both figuratively and literally, about being happy. We know that happy people are rated as more attractive by other people in the world. They make more money, $600,000 to $700,000 more over the course of their entire lifetime.
Wow.
On average. They live 6 to 7, sometimes 11 years longer than their unhappy counterparts. They get married earlier, stay married longer, are happier in all the relationships, whether they're married or not, because we know it's not about marriage. They experience less
Wow.
job burnout. They enter in the flow state more easily. So happiness is a really attractive, literally and figuratively, a quality.
And do you believe like 100% then that happiness is a choice?
It's a great question. So there are levels to this one. I would say that yes, and happiness is not what you do, although it helps to do happy things.
Mm-hmm.
Happiness is not what you think, although it helps to think happy thoughts. Happiness is what you are. So it's not a lifestyle status. It's not a state of circumstances. It's not a state of mood. It's not a state of mind. It's a state of no mind, ultimately. That the happiness that we seek in things, people, places, activities, and objects is something that we inherently and intrinsically and innately are, but we never stop thinking long enough to recognize it and realize it. So I know that's like the postgraduate level
That's
course.
deep. That's deep. Yeah.
Yeah, but I can't hold back on that because
I
it
know.
took 20 years to finally appreciate that. But yes.
In the TED talk that I watched your professor do, he brought it up in a good way. And I've seen this before on a documentary. I think it was the happiness or happy it was called. And they talk about when somebody is doing something where like he would in the video, it was in the documentary, it was the person that was rock climbing. Your guy was talking about somebody that was in the stock exchange, and that when he'd go onto the floor in the morning onto the stock exchange, all time would disappear. And same with the rock climber, all time would disappear, and they would drop in to this place that they loved so much that because of that, the time disappeared and they were in this state of joy and happiness. And so I feel like that's what's kind of what you're saying.
Crushing it right now. Go ahead and drop that little tiny mic right there, Karen. Crushing it.
Boom.
What? Recognize that's so powerful. That's exactly, and that's why, and this is how we come full circle, right? Like Abraham Hicks was such an inspiration to me because I was obsessed with being a professional basketball player. That's the truth.
Oh.
And I wanted to be a professional basketball player, and I would practice till my hands bled. One reason I loved loved basketball, never went on to play professionally. One reason I loved it and even loved running, which I thought I would never love, was because it gave me access to the flow state. And flow state is characterized by a loss of self-consciousness, a loss of time consciousness. You're so tapped in, tuned in, turned on, absorbed and consumed and engaged with what you're doing that you have no time to really think long and hard about how you're doing, right? So you're really in a state of appreciation, right? In lots of ways, a deep state of appreciation. But that spaceless, timeless, sort of infinite, eternal experience of perfect bliss, it's another way of describing the divine or spirit or happiness or love or true success.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a lot of listeners right now going, what?
Yeah.
What are you guys talking about?
Yeah.
I don't get
it. Yeah. And that there is the reason we struggle so much with unhappiness, is because we want to figure it all out. But to be happy doesn't require very much. If you look at little babies and little animals, they're often much happier than us grown adults who know so much and are always trying to figure something out. And so true happiness and peace and love is the peace and the love and the happiness that I think passes understanding, right? It goes beyond needing to understand the world or yourself. Yeah, of course you work at that. Mm-hmm. But just notice that moment before you slip off to sleep at night where you're so tired that you have no thoughts left in your head and your body is so worn out that you don't want to move. Notice how blissful that is. And then just practice that during the day.
Yeah. And I think when you said, write down the things that bring you, that you like to do and that bring you joy, and a lot of those lists, you guys, and what's in those lists are times where you will likely drop into the space that we're talking about. So I think that that's probably a great first step, is to write that list down, do more of those things, and recognize how do you feel when you're doing that. I used to do body work. I did body work for 17 years, and I would experience it quite often when I was doing the body work, because I would drop in without even knowing it. And that's when I did the most powerful work. And all these things would come to me, like intuitive things about the person, about their body, about what was wrong, where to go on their body to work out that pain issue. And I could just follow it. And it was like this magic, like somebody was working through my hands. And, 1 hour would go by in 2 minutes. And I'd be like, oh, geez, what just happened here? And I often feel it now with this job. I feel it a lot when I'm being interviewed or I'm interviewing. I drop in and it's like an hour interview will go by in like 2 seconds. I'll be like, geez, where did that time go with the right person? But that, I think, that's it. So it doesn't have to be this great big, like, you're rock climbing up the side of a mountain. It could be simply walking in the woods. Something.
You just nailed it. Ellen Langer, the Harvard psychologist, brilliant, who's done a lot of studies on mindfulness and how you can reverse aging and all these kinds of things. She just basically describes it as look for the new things everywhere you go, even your own house. We were spending a lot of time in our homes, but just look for the things you haven't noticed before. If you could be more intentional about noticing things that either you enjoy, that you love, or that are simply new, you'll find yourself enjoying the moment so much more deeply. And if you practice that, like anything, between about 21 and 66 days, your brain will rewire itself to do it in a much more automatic and effortless way. And so it's really just about practice. And you just need to do it in the moment. You don't need to do it all at once. And you certainly don't need to climb Mount Everest. Just start where you are. If it's with folding the laundry or Swiffering or doing the dishes, just try to enjoy it a little bit more. Really try to pretend like it's the last moment you might ever get. If you really are serious about that, you'd be surprised at how much more enjoyable even the simplest of activities are.
Yeah. In that documentary, I'll never forget, because I've watched this probably like 10 years ago. And I remember at the very end when they talked about measuring the brain, like looking at the brain when it came to different activities that people were doing and what brought happiness to them. Because we all think wealth, number one, I think would be wealth, and looks would bring happiness. And it doesn't.
You just nailed it. And that's the biggest thing, is that, success doesn't lead to happiness. Happiness is the greatest success, and happiness leads to traditional forms of success, right? So you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. And so what they found was, which I think this is just so cool, what they saw was the highest level of happiness consistently that they saw in people's brains was when they gave or when they helped another person. I thought that is amazing.
This is so powerful. So that, just what you shared, is something I had discovered. And it blew me away, because you're right. It's this positive upward spiral or loop where happy people turn out to be a lot more altruistic. They give more blood, they donate more money, all the things. They're kinder. And also, being kinder, being more altruistic, being more giving in a no strings attached sort of way makes you happier, right? So there's this positive upward spiral that happens with happiness and generosity or kindness. And so you can kind of get there either way. Now, the challenge, of course, is if you're being kind or you're donating or you're giving from a place where you're expecting reciprocity and it has strings attached, you will not enhance or improve your happiness very much, if at all, right? We've all tried that. And that was my problem as a kid. I would always give, and then they didn't say thank you, and then I'd be more, resentful about it. But you just nailed it. Happiness and kindness or generosity are tightly correlated.
Yeah. So there's another little tip or tool that you guys can use if you're trying to just bring more happiness in. Maybe just go out and do something for somebody else, and you'll get that happiness if you don't expect anything back.
Totally. And they say that if you want to learn something, teach it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the way of doing it.
Yeah. And get out of that head, like for once and for all in your lives, everybody listening, let go of the fact that, you're listening to this podcast. So I'm guessing you're struggling with weight. Let go of the fact that getting the perfect body, getting more money in your life, getting the new car, the new house is going to bring you that happiness, because it's not. I really do think it has to come from the inside out. So I think you're right.
Beautifully said. It's so true.
And then we could all be like Jim, my husband's coworker. And when people say, "How are you doing?" "Oh, so good."
I love Jim. I love
Jim too.
Oh, it's just, and we could live a lot more like Jim, all of us.
Exactly. If he only knew it, we were talking about him. Hey, he has no idea. I'm going to tell my husband to tell him.
Yeah, totally.
So tell us that you have something cool coming up soon, which is something called Joy School, which I think we could probably all go to.
Yes, absolutely. You're all invited. I would love nothing more. There's no question about it. Joy School is really an intensive that I'm offering with a close friend and coach author named Lisa McCourt. Lisa McCourt, she's a best-selling author. She wrote a lot of the Chicken Soup for the Little Soul series, and she wrote Juicy Joy. And so she's just this incredibly joyful, loving, one of the most loving people I've ever met. And so she and I are offering this school. Really, it's a virtual school, and we're going to simply start at A, and go all the way to Z with respect to joy. And the intention is for it to be an applied experience, but also one that's participative, that is interactive, right? So we want to answer all questions. We don't have any ego in this. I mean, I really only love doing what I do because I get to see other people happy. That makes me happy. So yeah, we're offering Joy School. You can go to lisamccourt.com, or you can go to coachrobmack.com and find more info, or you can find me on social media and just write me. But yeah, you're all invited. And if for any reason you have trouble paying or whatnot, we can work that out. We're going to offer scholarships. There's no good reason to not do it. If you want to do it,
Right.
we'll help you work with that.
And I'll link to that in the show notes, everyone. So one final question, Rob. So as a weight loss and hormone coach, and doing this podcast and being out there in the public with it, I feel pressure to keep, a good weight, keep at a good weight, to keep my hormones balanced, to always eat well. And I try to be very, honest and authentic, and tell everybody that, hey, I'm not perfect. I don't claim to be perfect. I just had 2 weeks of eating nothing but chocolate and baked goods because it was Christmas. Rob, do you feel that like you always got to be happy? And do you have your bad days? Like you're
Yeah.
just like, screw happiness. I feel like shit.
Totally. Gosh, I appreciate that. By the way, that's why you're so sweet. You feel the big good, and so beautiful too.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's true. I will say anything can happen. Okay. I wonder a lot about things in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and things are by no means perfect at all anywhere in my life. And yet I haven't had a bad day in forever. I really haven't. And I don't mean that things haven't gone really wrong. And I don't mean that circumstances haven't been a hot mess, right? The difference is, for me, is that I've really divested a lot, most of my happiness from the world. I've divorced it from that. I have preferences, very strong preferences about how I want things to turn out. And I like making money, and I like sharing money. I like having a roof over my head, and I like all these things. Okay. But I've been surprised, and I don't take credit for that, but I've been surprised by how powerful and supportive the work has been, and all these teachers have been, and podcasts like yours have been in my life. Like I've been overwhelmed. Like in 1 year, it seemed like nothing was happening. In 2 years, in 5 years, in 20 years, some shifts have happened. I had my college roommate who I admired so much and respected so much, about, I don't know, 8 or 9 months ago, after we had him on this morning show that I was doing in LA. A couple months after that, he killed himself.
Oh my
Stabbed himself
gosh.
30 times in the stomach. And it's a really close friend of mine. He lived right down the street from me. And I was really sad that I wasn't going to see his face again and connect with him in that way. But I was also extraordinarily surprised that I felt tremendous relief about that. And I felt happy for him. Like, what a prison to live in that body, in that life. I know I've been there, and that's not for a second to encourage anybody to do anything but to reach for happiness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to seek out professional help when you need it. And that, in the same breath, nothing really goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Things might not go according to our desires and wants, but everything is really just another opportunity to dive deeper into what's truly real and lasting and abiding and meaningful. And I promise you, it's not in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So definitely things don't go perfectly or anywhere close to that. And lots of things aren't the way that I would want them to be when I think through my rational brain. But when I dive deeper, I realize that I've always been wrong. I've always been wrong. 20 years ago, you'd said, hey, how about you go through the suicidal experience and then you work at it for, I would say, no, oh my gosh, heck no. And now I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I can't imagine anything better that could have happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish that upon everyone, that you could all look back on the hardest moments of your life and see the blessing in it, because they're always a learning experience from it. And it's always a chance to grow and to become happier and to become closer to who you really are. I really believe that. So well said, though. I like that. Yeah. Okay, Rob, it's been great. We could just keep talking all day, I'm sure.
I get soul shivers when I'm connected to somebody at a soul level. And let me tell you, this entire time, it's hot in here. I've got the heat turned up and I'm freezing. So that just goes to show that, you your light, your love, your laughter, your wisdom. I'm so deeply indebted to you for sharing it with me, for sharing it with all of us. I'm so inspired by not just what you do, but who you are. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You're bringing happiness to the world, and we need more of it right now. So, everyone, you can go find him, coachrobmack.com. Thank you, Rob.